Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of RC Classic Garage. You join me today where I'm back working on the E-Type. And as a reminder, this is a very good example of an unrestored original E-Type Jaguar that had been standing for many years. And then just to recap on all the work that we have done, we've gone through the full fuel system of the car, including a carb rebuild, the full electronic system, upgrading it to a 123 electronic distributor, and then fixing a whole host of issues on the car. So do go back and look at some of those videos. And in today's video, we're actually going to be looking at the two gauges which have been working intermittently and not working very well. And that's the speedometer and the oil pressure gauge. And in order to upgrade both these gauges and make them much more accurate and usable, what we are going to do is convert the current electronic oil pressure gauge into a mechanical gauge, and the current mechanical speedometer into an electronic speedometer. I've had a lot of issues with the speedometer. I've renewed the angle drive at the gearbox, I've renewed the cable, and I've had the speedometer rebuilt. And I've actually found out that the problem lies inside the gearbox where the gear is stripped that drives the angle drive. Now for us to fix that, that is quite a major job, and it's taking the gearbox out. And actually I do that when the clutch needs to be done. The clutch does not need to be done in the car. So as an interim solution, in order to retain as much originality as possible in the car, I'm just going to be removing that gauge and replacing it with this, which is an electronic gauge which works with the GPS tracker. Now this gauge will be very accurate being off a GPS tracker, but also importantly I went to great lengths to source the right size and also ensuring that it's a Smith gauge with the correct Jaguar font, so it looks as original as possible. So the way this works looks pretty simple. What you have is a GPS sensor which sits on top of your dash. That goes into an ECU unit, and the ECU unit is wired up with a positive and a negative going to the terminals, and then it has three outputs of pulse per minute. So you basically pick which one you want at 16,000, 8,000 or 4,000. I'll potentially just pick the white one, which is 8,000 pulse per minute, and calibrate that to the gauge. And then on the gauge side, similarly, there's only three wires that you really need to take care of. It's the positive and the negative connected to the terminal, and then the black and white wire, which is your speed sensor input. And again, once you couple that and we select the 8,000 pulse per minute, it's then just a matter of calibrating the gauge to the correct pulse, and that will then calibrate the gauge to the correct speed. So let's get on and install the gauge and sensor. So a pretty simple process of removing the original gauge from the car. So what we'll do is box up the original gauge, because this gauge has been rebuilt, and ensuring that everything is kept as original behind the car. So if anybody wants to return this to originality in the future once the gearbox has been repaired, this will be a relatively simple process once again. So here it is all wired up, gauge in, GPS tracker up at the top of the dash, and the little ECU box I'm going to put on the parcel shelf really neatly just under there. The Jaguar E-Type is fitted with an electronic oil pressure gauge, and they are notorious for giving hassle on their sender units. As you can see, I've been through 4 sender units. I've replaced my voltage regulator. I've even landed up replacing the gauge in the car, and I still have a load of issues. So what I have decided to do is to replace the entire gauge once again, but this time with a mechanical gauge. These are known to be a lot more reliable. So I did manage to source a Smith's gauge which has the correct original look, marked up to 60. So we'll be fitting this to the car. The electronic oil sender unit is located on top of the oil filter, which you can just see behind. It is quite difficult to get to, but you can get to it with the air filter removed. After removing the dome type sender, it's a relatively simple process. Replace it with the new sender unit and mechanical pipe. So I have connected up this side first to put this back into the sender unit hole, and then we will feed the pipe through their bulkhead. So that is now all connected. After some routing coming through there, and I've gone through the bulkhead, basically where the speedo cable goes into the bulkhead. Cable from the speedo back out and around through the wiring. Now we'll just change the gauge. And gauge is fitted and working. So what we'll just do now is run it for a while and just check that we have no oil leaks. So really happy with that. Gauge is now fitted and working really nicely, and the oil pressure gauge is working once again. Thank you for joining me on another episode of RC Classic Garage, where we can give a tick to the oil pressure gauge and the speedo. Oil pressure gauge we upgraded from a electronic to a mechanical one, which I think will never give any problem. And for the speedo we went the other way, from mechanical back to electronic, which is more accurate, but left it with all the originality that if we want to put it back to original, once we fix the gearbox, we can. Thanks again for watching another episode of RC Classic Garage, and see you all next time.